Low poly has become an important trend amongst indie developers. It's easy to start making, pretty, and is being used in so many interesting ways. But what has caused the popularity of this trend? Why are developers using it? And how? Low poly styles revolve around using small numbers of 2D polygons, such as triangles, to make 3D shapes. All 3D models are made out of these, but in most modern games, they're very small and they try to hide them in the quest for realism. Low poly allows artists to reduce something to its core parts and focus on what is most important about a scene. Developers use most of the graphics resources in a console so that an acceptable frame rate can be maintained. Obviously the games with the best art direction aged better than those without, but the frame rate had to come first, and therefore many polygons were sacrificed. This made the remaining ones obvious. Games incorporated this characteristic feature into their designs. Just look at the Arwing from the original Star Fox. It probably has less than 15 faces on it, and yet it's an iconic design. While many low poly artists state that the original PlayStation and its contemporaries are an important reference, the evolution of graphics means that at the time, things like Spyro were actually high poly. Without this progress, we wouldn't be able to compare what the best of graphics technology allows and the much simpler creations used in low poly art. In other words, without high poly, there would be no low poly. The difference between now and then is ideology. Games like Quake were made as part of revolutionary strides on the cutting edge of realistic 3D. Modern developers are using low poly as a less complex alternative, and because it looks gorgeous in its own right. It's a way of wearing a game's computeriness on its sleeve and allows players to fill in the gaps themselves. After the advent of what we could consider modern high poly graphics, few people were using low poly. Japanese developers used it for 3D handheld systems like the DS and PSP. Then the iPhone arrived. The necessity of making a smooth-running iPhone game with the limited hardware made the style relevant again. Mobile game stores gave indie teams a place to start up, and combined with a bit of nostalgia for the mid-90s, the conditions were met for the reinvention of the low poly aesthetic. So what does the art style bring to the table? Well, there's the technical stuff. The RPG Y2K uses this 32 by 32 pixel picture to add colour to its 3D models. The colour on each polygon for everything in this room is chosen from a single palette. This is an advantage over huge high definition textures because it means your computer has far less information to load, so the game runs faster. It also lets the developers swap the colours out on the models. When they want to change the atmosphere or add in a stronger version of an enemy, all they have to do is swap the palette. Anti-aliasing, a common technique to make lines appear smoother, isn't used here, so the edges don't blur. This means they can build the patterns of the clothes and other details into the model itself. No matter how close to the camera or what resolution it's at, the colour and definition is always there. Shelter and Shelter 2 use a different approach for its texturing. Fur and grass and rock are painted. This time the polygons each take part of a larger texture instead of a block of colour. The grass and the camouflage on the links look like a collage. Drift Stage uses much more cleanly fitting pixel art textures for a bold, sharp neon look. Combined with that cool stripy glass reflection effect, it's a great homage to 80s arcade races. Lighting is important for giving places depth. Skyrogue's lighting allows the player a better sense of direction, which is especially useful when all you can see is the flat blue sky. Skipping Stones has no lighting at all, which flattens everything on the screen. Instead, it shows where shadows and highlights would be by colouring in faces on the 3D models lighter or darker. The game then changes the colours with the time of day for a kind of living painting effect. There is a lot of freedom to play with shape and what it represents. Reducing a thing to its basic elements makes it easier for people to interpret the form for themselves. These, for instance, are obviously flowers. They aren't imitating reality, rather they're a stylized representation of flowers. We use what we already understand flowers to be to fill in the details. This, on the other hand, is far more abstract. It could be anything you want it to be. A robot crab chair? That Dragon Cancer is about a child with cancer seen from the perspective of his father. The emotion in the narrator's voice is enough to cement you in the world, and from there you can be taken on a journey through someone else's eyes. I don't believe That Dragon Cancer would work in a more realistic style. Putting fine detail into a room wouldn't add anything meaningful and could possibly subtract from empathizing with the situation. Y2K has both a normal world and a much more bizarre fantasy world, and it uses the same art style for both. Having this consistency between places that are very different atmospherically makes it a lot easier to accept. It's like putting two different ideas together by using the visuals as a common thread so you can follow along. In Glitch Hikers there are glitch effects and inexplicable things happening that make it seem more like a dream. Low poly doesn't pretend to be real, so you can blend something odd into the mix. Readability is an important aspect of low poly. Lovely Planet, for example, uses both colour and silhouette so you can identify each enemy instantly. That's pretty important seeing as it's a speedrunning shooter. All the enemies are red so they stand out in the scenery. Also, each enemy type has a distinctive shape, so you can react to them appropriately. These 4 variations, although similar, can be told apart without anything pointing to them or making them glow. This isn't something that only low poly can do, but its simplicity lends itself to easily understood visuals. I don't think that low poly is being used to drum up nostalgia in players. These games and artists are reviving a style from the early days of 3D and making it their own with modern technology. So if low poly is your jam, then I have a seriously awesome list of free low poly games for you. If you've enjoyed this video, then check out my others about pixel art, roguelike and indie game music. Until next time, thank you for watching.